Welcome back. It is the Marketer of the Day podcast. John MacDonald who is here, and he's the author of Behind the Click, How to Use Hidden Psychological Forces That Shape Online Behavior to Craft Digital Journeys that Delight, Engage, and Convert. John was here, I don't know, I think like 7 years ago, and then we reconnected recently on the Scaling Secrets podcast, which we'll link to in the show notes. And then I said, hey, let's get some more exposure. And isn't that the dream of every marketer, to go and do the press tour, do the publicity, and you just end up going on all these different shows. And so we're going to jump into this amazing book and this idea of digital experience optimization. So that way you can convert, you can delight your customers, you can make money, you can have a website that makes sense and all those other things. And so we're going to have a lot of fun and share some ideas and get some ahas, insights. So John, how the heck are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back. Yeah, it's been 7 years. I can't believe it. It feels like a decade ago, right? But almost.
Yeah, and a lot's changed. And, I'm so glad that back then I started podcasting, because it's just, there's always all these things to keep up with, right? And there's always some new apps, some new websites, some new techniques, some new change in the rules. And imagine taking a break from internet marketing for a year or two. You just quit, right? You wouldn't be able to stay up to speed. So it helps to kind of have the drip feed of watching the YouTubes, listening to the podcasts, talking to people, just to stay up to date on what we need to do, and also to stay with the fundamentals, which I know that you're big on, right? A lot of these kind of psychological principles and converting on a website. So, with me kind of rambling a little bit, tell us what you're all about. Like, what's your current focus and passion? What has you excited?
Well, I agree with you that, digital experience changes every day. Consumers are always changing. Digital devices are always changing. Payment methods, how to shop online. It's, rapidly changing. Just think about where we were pre-COVID to today, and that's only been a handful of years, and the exponential leap we took in shopping online. And that is partly why I wrote Behind the Click, because so many people were focused on what tactics you should take to optimize your site, knowing that, hey, I'm spending more money than ever to get people to my site, but they're not converting at as high of a rate as I'd like to see. How do I fix that? And they go online, they start doing some research, they find a bunch of checklists, or they do competitive research and they start copying what competitors are doing. All these things that lack the understanding of why they would do any of those tactics. And so I decided to write Behind the Click to really help people to understand the psychological factors that influence these behaviors online. And then once you understand what's going through the mind of your consumer, you can take that and implement the right tactics for you by helping to influence how you wish you could influence, and being able to look at that tactic list and say, I should do A and D and Z and skip everything else, because those aren't concerns my consumers are thinking about.
I think that is huge. And where many times we all have this problem, right? We get stuck on what's not important, or what might be important, like way in the future. That order of importance is huge. And so I love this Behind the Click idea, that we don't think about it a lot, right? When we go and buy and we're just in a hurry, we're like, oh, I need to, get this new ring light. Let me just kind of click a button on my phone. And we don't realize all the work that has gone into someone putting us on a path, from searching, social media, retargeting, getting to the page, getting to the cart. It's been optimized in all these ways. And then we ourselves might get frustrated in setting this up, because as you said, you look at the competitors, you look at the checklists, and you're even more confused than when you started looking at it. And when at first years ago, I ignored all this psychological stuff. I just thought like, I'll hire a copywriter, or I don't have a psychology degree. But then it feels like it's one of those things where we at least need to have some kind of a base level understanding, right? Because like when I first heard of some of these ideas, like attention, interest, desire, action, I'm like, just that's huge. And then you look at websites in a new light, or things like a bucket brigade or conversion rates.
Mm.
There's these simple ideas. And then once you are aware of them, you're like, wow, like this, there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And so, tell us what is missing these days. What do we need to know as far as getting our websites converting and just overcoming the overwhelm?
Well, I think the first thing is that most marketers get it wrong, where they really focus on getting people to their site and then they ignore what happens for the most part once somebody gets there. They think that once they get somebody to the site, they need to continue to market to them. And I'm a firm believer that once somebody has gotten to your website, your marketing has won. It is now time to switch into selling mode. It is now time to help people to accomplish the tasks that they are at your site to accomplish. And there's over 50 psychological principles in Behind the Click. And if I could distill them all down to one thing, it's the fact that we make hundreds of thousands of decisions a day. Most of them we don't know we're making. We don't think about it. It's called heuristics, right? It's mental shortcuts to making all of these decisions. Now, the thing about that is that if our brains are making decisions for us and we're not actively consciously thinking about making those decisions, then as a brand, you're going to have a hard time influencing those decisions unless you know how they are being made, right? You know what the psychology is behind them. And it really is one of those things where all of those shortcuts are your brain trying to help you to get things done. Okay. And that's why it's a shortcut. It's a shortcut. What's the shortest from A to B? That's what your brain wants to do. It doesn't want to think about it in between, just wants to go, go, go and do it. And you need to harness that out of your customers. And if you are overly concerned about continuing to market to those customers when they are already on decision making, you are going to lose that customer because you're getting in the way of them making that decision. Consumers are only at your digital property for two reasons. And over 15 years of optimizing sites, there's only two reasons we've ever found. And it's that they are there to understand, can you help solve their pain or need, right? And they want to make that determination as quickly and easily as possible. And if the answer is yes, they want to convert as quickly and easily as possible and get on with their lives, right? So there's no other reason for somebody to be on your site other than to understand and solve their problem. And if you can, they want to make sure that problem gets solved, and then they want to get on to the next problem. And you need to harness that realization of helping people on these journeys instead of continuing to tell them why they should buy from you.
That's huge. And it simplifies things, right? It lets us focus on just what that next logical step is. You're saying, well, can you solve my pain? And then how do I convert? And then what's also really helpful is this idea of marketing is one thing and sales is another thing. And I have to shamefully admit, I didn't even know the difference between these terms. Like up until, I don't even know, a few years ago, I kind of used those terms interchangeably, right? I thought like, oh, well, you're putting all these things out there. And when you're marketing, you're catching people from who knows where on the internet, and then you get them on your site. And then it's like, okay, now they're on your site. Now you've almost won. You're so close. And so now it's just like, okay, now how do we get them over the finish line and get them to get on that landing page looking at the sales letter? Can this help me? Does it have the one thing that I'm looking for? And so that helps us to just solve these little problems at a time and then hopefully debug the system, right? Because if we're just not thinking in these terms, if we're just like, oh, well, what's the checklist? How do I increase my conversion percentage? That's a whole mess. But then if you're saying, well, the bottleneck is here, right? They're on the site here, but it's loading too slow, or they're leaving quickly, or they're clicking on some distraction. It's like, well, those are some solvable problems. And so can you like share a story or something with us? Can you tell us about one of these problems that was solved, something that's, remarkable, noteworthy, fun to talk about, just as far as the the before and after of you, getting websites to solve the pain and convert.
Yeah, actually, a really great example of this is from Easton Baseball. I don't know if you're familiar with Easton at all. They are the major sponsor of Little League World Series. They're the number one manufacturer of aluminum baseball bats, which you can't use in the major leagues, but Little League, etc., almost all aluminum. In fact, you probably can see right
Right
here, there's a
there.
baseball bat that they gave us that says the good. They engraved on it with Easton as a thank you for our work together. Um, what we did is when we went into Easton's website, we asked them, "What's your goal?" And they said, "Well, we want to sell more, but we also have this problem. We're getting a lot of returns on our bats, and we don't know why." I said, "Okay, well, that's two big challenges. Um, why don't we talk to their customer service teams?" And they said, "Okay." So what we did is we asked their customer service teams to fill out a simple form every time they got off the phone. And we did this for only a couple of days. We said, "You get off the phone, just spend 2 minutes and fill out this form before you take your next call." And they said, "Okay." Questions were super simple. It was like, what was the call about? And were you able to solve it? And was it, there were like 4 categories there of like, it was tech support, it was a buying question, it was customer service, like a return or something of that sort, right? And then, do you want to tell us anything else? And what we found out of that was that the majority of people calling in were calling in for one of 2 reasons. They were calling in because they did not understand what bat they should buy, right? So the website was not helping them address their pain or need, right? And if they could be solved. And 2, when they were calling to return bats, they were doing it because they had bought the wrong bat. Now, a little bit of background on this is a kid in Little League, there are a whole bunch of different organizations and they all have certifications for bats. And you're only allowed to use bats that are certified for each of those types of general leagues, right? And so what happens is, so many parents were out and buying bats that are $200 for their kid, right? And a kid would take batting practice and get comfortable with the bat, ding it up a little bit, scuff it up, right? It wouldn't hurt the bat, but it might look like used, right? And then they'd get up to home plate to bat during the game, and the umpire wouldn't let them swing with the bat. Said, "Hey, that bat's not certified for this league. You can't swing with it." And so then essentially parents had bought a 200-pound paperweight or $200 paperweight. And the problem really became that it was frustrating for the consumer. It was frustrating for the brand. And it was an overall just bad look in general. And so what we decided to do was help parents understand how they should be thinking about buying a bat and to filter that process down. And so we interviewed parents and said, "Okay, what are your biggest challenges?" "Well, my son likes to hit, he's swinging for the fences and every single time." Or, "My son is trying to just, bunt the ball and get on base." Right. Or, "My son is an okay hitter, but he's just, middle lineup, whatever." Well, the reality is that once they would come to the website, it would be a wall of bats. It all look exactly the same. It looked like a pencil, and just a whole bunch of lines of them with these pictures. So what we decided to do was put together a questionnaire. Pretty simple. What league is your kid in? That immediately filters it down to a handful of bats that are right for them. Then what type of style of hitter is your child? Are they swinging for the fences? Are they just trying to get on base? What is it, right? And then it was how much does your kid weigh? And that's a good question because there's different bats that come in different sizes, right? And so it was just a way to kind of help understand if your kid could swing with a certain type of bat or it was a good fit. And by the time you got done with that, you ended up with usually 2 or 3 bats. Much easier process. Now, as a parent, I can decide based mainly on price point at that point. Do I want to spend $400 or $150? Is my kid looking to go to the major leagues, or is he just playing for fun? Right. And at that point, they knew with confidence they could buy a bat. It wasn't going to have to get returned. And out of this, Easton sold 187% year over year off of their website, and they reduced returns by dramatically, I want to say by 80 or 90%. And so the reality was that everybody won. The parents were able to get the bat their child needed and were confident about it and get it done much quicker and easier. And the brand was able to not only sell more, but reduce returns. And so, the goals were both the same in the end. But what was interesting was that Easton thought they were being very fancy by naming all these functionalities on bats and giving them names that were super fancy and cool, but didn't tell parents anything. And so we had to kind of bring it back down to earth for them.
A confused mind never buys, right? And
Right.
I can imagine how there's the kind of that mental bias of you put a lot of work, you put the sunk cost into like naming the bats and all this work and categorizing. Who knows how many people were involved and meetings and organizing and designing and making the webpage and saying, hey, this has got to work because we spent 6 months on this. But then it didn't work. And then what's also great about hearing about your process is you didn't just do the superficial, right? Because like maybe 10 years ago, that sort of thing drove me crazy when people would say like, oh, here's all my split test results. Make your button orange and make this text blink. And I was just like, okay, like those are some good ideas, but what if something is really flawed fundamentally, which it seems like it was, right? And so you said, well, what's the data? Go back to the source. You said, well, let's look at these few days worth of customer service calls, and then let's go to the other side of it and interview these different customers and just have these conversations. And by doing that, it seems like naturally you figure out the pie chart, right? Naturally things begin to sort themselves out of saying like, well, sometimes people have like a special case of unique needs, but then the huge glaring problem that we keep seeing is this. And then how do we go about solving it? And even as you were describing the solution, like my imagination went crazy, right? I was thinking like, oh, they go to a website and it's like, click on this or this, narrow that down, click on this or this, and like 3 steps of that. And instead of it being like this huge wall of all these choices, it's like this branch in the tree, this branch, and it really narrows it down. And it kind of helps the decision-making process be simpler. And so you've like been helpful and provided more information without adding to the chaos and the noise, which is like what you're saying, right? Once they get to your site, don't keep overloading and don't keep adding it. Like direct them towards figuring what they need to know, narrowing down the decision, and then being like, okay, instead of you looking at 25 bats, here's just these 2. And then even that's a simple decision because it's based on the price. So I love that story. And I want to make sure that we cover the bases and so to speak, right? That was unintentional, but yeah. But I want to make sure we only have 20 minutes here, unlike the Scaling Secrets podcast. But I want to make sure that having heard those cool stories, you've given us some cool ideas. We want to make sure to mention the book, which is Behind the Click, and your company, which is The Good. So tell us what someone should know about you, your company, the book. What problems should they have in order to find you and get their problem solved by you?
Well, we have been for over 15 years optimizing digital journeys at The Good. It's the name of my company. You can just find us at thegood.com. We've worked with brands. I mentioned Easton, but like Nike, Xerox, Adobe, The Economist. We overhauled their paywall. So if you've ever gone to read The Economist and hit that paywall, that experience was due to my team. Now, really, people come to us because their consumers aren't converting on their website. Typically, you would think of conversion optimization as a category that we're in. And while that's true, that's a small segment of where we focus. We aren't just looking to get people to convert. We're looking further up the funnel as well, because you're leaking a ton of site visitors once they even get to your site to understand how to get them to the next step in the funnel. And eventually, yes, to conversion. That is an ultimate goal. But we need to actually get them to that step. And traditional conversion optimization, as you mentioned earlier, is typically around A/B testing. And that really often becomes more focused on the tactic of how to just get somebody to click a button or take that next step. But they forget about what happens in the psychology that's behind it. And that's why I wrote Behind the Click. You can see that here. We have it up on our site. It's everywhere where books are sold, Amazon, etc. But if you go to thegood.com/be BTC for behind the click, and use code BTC podcast 50 you will get 50% off a copy of the book, and I believe we can give that to you as well, so you can put that in the show notes. Again, that's BTC for behind the click podcast 50. You'll get 50% off if you buy it directly from us. Again, you can get it anywhere books are sold as well.
Very cool. And that's a huge lesson right there, that there's like, there might be something deeper psychologically, or where you're getting your customers or what your customers are thinking. It requires some strategy instead of just the superficiality in order to get to that really deeper hidden problem right there. And you can spend all day long playing around with the conversion rate, but if something really at its core is a problem, then that's when you need someone like John and his team, or maybe even crack open the Behind the Click book and look into solving this problem yourself. thegood.com/BTC. And as people are going there, John, and we're wrapping up our conversation, I'm going to do the same thing that we did on the Scaling Secrets podcast, which is ask you for a fun quote or lesson, because books are filled with that. And sometimes we think of like, ooh, John told me that really cool lesson. That makes you want to go and run and tear the book open at page 87 and see what that's all about. So is there something that's really fun and interesting from Behind the Click, maybe like a quote or lesson that you can share with us that will really motivate us to check out this book?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of really interesting psychological factors. One of the ones that really struck me was what's called the IKEA effect. Have you ever heard of that, Robert? It's
I think I heard of it last week when we were on the other show.
Okay, well, I'll do a different one, but I'll tell everybody really quickly about the IKEA effect, just in case you don't listen to the other episode. But the idea behind the IKEA effect is that when you build something yourself, or have your hand in making it, you are inherently feel ownership of that and feel much better positively about it. So SaaS brands letting people put their own bundles together, even on e-commerce, letting people say, oh, I want, 2 of this color and 1 of that color, mix them together, things of that sort can really help customer sentiment. Now, a second one for you, because I already did that one, thanks for reminding me, is called the buy now effect. And it's spelled BYE. So the idea behind this is using the word buy, as in BYE, on copy where you want people to buy, BUY, can have the effect of making people psychologically more at ease with buying your product. So in the copy, use the word BYE, and that typically can help people BUY. And it's really interesting. There's a whole couple of pages about it in this book, but it was something that really struck me, but the research is there to back it up, and it's really interesting.
And it's fun to think about playing with the language, the phonological ambiguity, they call it, right? Like buy now versus buy now. And it's like, okay, it's the finality, it's time to buy. And I've also been thinking since the last time we spoke with that IKEA effect, just that there's a lot of situations, even you mentioned here today, where a negative can be spun into a positive.
Yeah.
And so what came to mind about that whole IKEA assembling the furniture is like, WordPress just came to mind about that, right? With WordPress, you sell a theme, you sell a plugin. And the downside of that is someone says, oh, well, I have to like have a WordPress site. It has to fit into my system. Can I use some kind of all-in-one SaaS? And that's a situation where like someone who's buying, say, that WordPress plugin from you, they're feeling that pride of ownership of like assembling their own system, right? Of like building their own home and decorating it. And so there's just all these situations where it's easy to be negative and to give up and say, oh, well, here's this thing that's hurting me. And a lot of this kind of salesmanship and copywriting conversion is like, well, hey, how can you spin it into something that's a plus? Well, people are returning their bats and they're not sure. Well, how can you make it fun? And like you help narrow it down, and that's extra content, or it's little micro commitments, them kind of clicking through basically a 3-step quiz to narrow down the right bat. So there's all these situations where we can spin the bad into the good, pun intended. And so we need to go to thegood.com/BTC, use that coupon code, get the book. You're going to love it. And you're going to love it so much that you will contact John and his team to talk about your conversion needs, whether you're Adobe, Nike, Xerox, The Economist, or some other kind of company. These guys know what they're talking about as far as getting your websites to convert, as far as getting your customers to buy. So think of John MacDonald and the good and behind the click the next time you're looking to grow your business, make more sales, and everything that comes with that. And so, any final words, John, before signing off?
No, that is all. Thank you so much for having me today, and really appreciate everyone's support on the book launch. It's been a wonderful experience.
Very nice. And we're here to help you with that by people going to thegood.com/BTC. Go there right now. And great seeing you again, John.
You too.